Hey everybody, NFI Hammer here. Today, as a beginner, I'm going to tackle my very first ever named character, Illuminor Szeras. He's pretty awesome. He's got this very intimidating gravity staff and he's pulling the brain and guts out of this poor human on the floor. And he's got all these interesting extra limbs and arms, so a bit intimidating. Not sure if I'll be able to pull it off, but let's see if we can do this model together. Let's get started. This is issue 90 of the Imperium magazine, the very last issue ever made of this, so they've definitely saved the best model for last. It's quite sad actually, this magazine coming an end for me, because I've had so many amazing Necron models and so much amazing painting opportunities that this magazine has provided for a really cheap price. I've talked a lot about how this magazine and ones like it are a great way to pick up cheap models. Feel free to check out those videos if that's something that interests you. Looking at the sprue, it looks like there's a few fiddly pieces, which is a bit concerning, but hopefully we'll manage to not make too many mistakes today. I have seen online that a lot of people have complained about this model being difficult, so I'm just taking my time and cleaning up all the pieces as I go, and Artemis, my cat, has decided to join me and wish me luck. And I'm just using the Citadel plastic glue just to glue all of these together, and it's really quite a methodical and straightforward process so far. The magazine comes with all the instructions, as you can see in the background, and there's a lot of terrain pieces on this, which is really good. I really like the Warhammer Underworlds because they come with fully decorated bases, so I'm glad to see this in the 40k world. I have kind of made some mistakes here with his orbs glowing, but I think that it kind of looks okay. So after I've glued it to the base, I've actually cut the model off for the base so I can paint and prime them separately. So here I'm using a ultra matte black Rust-Oleum spray paint that I got from my local Bunnings store, and I'm just giving it a quick coat with this. I find when you're painting metallics that you want to use a black undercoat as much as possible for that. That way the metallics kind of pop a lot more and shine a lot more. When you paint them on white, they kind of look a little bit plasticky and muted. So starting with Rhinox Hide here, I'm using this Scorpec Lord as a reference point to get my model army all looking consistent. So the Rhinox Hide is this brown color, but when you paint it on the black, it can kind of look like a titanium sort of finish to it, so like sort of a really indestructible metal finish. So I like to use this on any like claws or any sort of feet that would be used for attacking people, as just a way of making the metals look different. I find that if they're all the same silver or bronze, it gets a bit boring. So I'm going a little bit different by using Warpstone Glow, which is my darker green color, and I'm going over all of the gauze energy that the Necrons have. This is usually like a stage I sort of do later, but I was kind of just trying to familiarize with the model and just call out at a high level what parts I'm going to be painting green later. And I'm going to be using a lighter green later, so this is sort of just like an undercoat. And I'm using it to try and get into all of these cracks. So in the armor plating, there's these little grooves, and I thought it would look cool if inside the grooves were like a green glowing color. So I'm just trying to make sure the paint goes into those grooves before applying Runelord Brass, which is my Necron go-to color for my army. I'm kind of using the Shuriken Dynasty theme for my models, and I'm just trying to pick out carefully all of these sorts of metallic join pieces and sort of like the armor pieces, and using that Runelord Brass for these colours. So this is where we've just gone over painting the green grooves, and now I'm just trying to not get any paint into those grooves and paint around the raised edges. And that way those grooves now have a green sort of colour rather than the black. And also painting the chest and these sorts of areas. This is one of the longer parts of the painting the model, is just there's so much copper to paint. And then to complement the copper, I'm using Leadbelcher here as a silver colour. So the 2 feet, or whatever you want to call them, I don't know what you call Necron legs, at the back, I'm using silver for these because they're not as chunky, so they look more like just general legs rather than sort of weapon legs. And then also the joins in the arms and face, and pretty much anything that I haven't painted copper or Rhinox Hide, I kind of paint silver. Any sort of tubes and stuff in their guts, parts of the weapon, the face, fingers, the little canisters and stuff. I have thought about using Retributor Armour, so the higher ranking the Necron unit is, I try and put more gold or more gems and stuff, and because this is my very first named character, I'm excited to have Illuminor Szeras in the battlefield. I thought he would sort of have a lot of bling, so to speak, to show off that he is, you know, the top ranking Necron person in my army. He's not just like a generic general, he's a specific person in the lore, and as such he deserves the respect and the jewelry of this dynasty. So once all the gold upper plating is plated, I've got this very bright silver called Runefang Steel. It's a lot more shiny than the Leadbelcher. So I'm just sort of trying to pull out any of these details, such as these spokes on his spine, and just colouring those in with this bright silver, just to give, again, a more level of bling to it, but I didn't want it all to be gold. And while I've got it out, I'm trying to do just some very light edge highlighting of the legs with this silver, just because it is a brighter version. You can kind of get some good edge highlighting in to make it look really good. And this is the only Citadel, non-Citadel paint that I'm using, which is metallic blue-green from Mr. Hobby. And, you know, I bought this to do like a jade mask on a free miniature of the month, but I kind of really love this color. It's really unique and interesting. So I use it to paint anything that is sort of like energy, mysterious energy, not gauze energy, because that's green, but anything else that's kind of, you know, science-y, technology, you know, Necron-y, I use this color. And I think because it's metallic, it goes quite well with the rest of the metallic in the model, but then because it's this bright blue-green color, it kind of stand out. And then for Moot Green, I've watered this down quite a lot so that I can kind of build up layers on the weapon, and I'm just trying to highlight certain sections and certain edges with this lighter Moot Green that's watered down, and I'll come back and do a couple of different coats, and what that does is it kind of builds up a more gradual color, because I'm trying to blend seems too fancy a word, but I'm trying to mix the Warpstone Glow and the Moot Green into the same weapon so that it looks like the energy is sort of pulsating and moving throughout the weapon. If you paint it all just straight Moot Green, it looks very like two-dimensional. And then for white, I'm just using white Scar, but you can use Pallid Witch Flesh or Corax white, whatever, but this is just the nearest bottle I had on my shelf, and I'm just trying to paint the face here white. On a lot of the Necron models I've done, the high-ranking cryptex, have like this white face, and I'm also just trying to edge highlight the weapon here, because later I'm going to come back with a technical paint and go over the whole thing. And then there's 2 points in the model where I want it to be very bright green, and that's the tip of the staff and his tip of his index finger pointing at the weapon, as well as I do a little bit of white on the staff. And then I've circled back to Leadbelcher again because I realized I've missed some stuff. So I've colored in the circles of this gold, armor silver, and the pistons on his weapon, and his fingers holding the weapon that I missed. And here I'm just, doing some edge highlighting. Basically, I'm just going through the whole thing and just trying to clean it up. Now, all those parts that we painted white before, we're going to go over with Tesseract Glow. So Tesseract Glow is this technical paint that kind of creates a super shade over any sort of texture like white or metallic, and gives it a little bit of a green glow effect. And so I'm just kind of going over anywhere we've got Moot Green, or anywhere that we've got the white scar, and giving it a little bit of a coat, and this kind of gives it that glowing feel. It took me a while to get used to Tesseract Glow, and I still don't know if I've got it perfect. Then I've got the Retributor Armour, which is the gold paint again, and I'm circling in the little dots in the brass armour, and then some red paint with Evil Sunz Scarlet on his little Terminator looking eye thing. And then a Beserker Bloodshade is this red shade, and I find that going over the gold colours creates more of a real finish to it. Without it, the gold can look a little bit plasticky, but this Bloodshade just gives it a little bit more metallic in a real world vibe, I guess. It is a subtle effect, and you definitely don't have to do it, but I find that it's well worth it if you have the paint available. And just making sure it doesn't pool too much in any particular area. And also going over the sigils on the weapon and the chest as well. And then Agrax Earthshade is that brown shade color, and I find that over the top of the bronze Runelord Brass really makes it look like living metal, like the Necrons. Apparently there was something called like a Cryptek Armor shade that was even better, but unfortunately they don't sell it anymore. You can find some bottles on eBay and stuff, but I find Agrax Earthshade over Runelord Brass works really well for me, and I've painted all of my armies using this recipe. Again, you don't want it to pool too much, otherwise it will really darken the model. But if that does happen, you can just use a brush and just brush it away, and if it does dry, you can actually just go over with Runelord Brass and have a second crack at it. And then finally, for all the Leadbelcher silver aspects, I'm using Nuln Oil here, and I'm just kind of painting it over the silver. It's good for these sorts of tubes and stuff because the Nuln Oil goes into the grooves and darkens the recesses. And then I just got Retributor Armour out again for the final time, and I'm just doing the edge highlighting, and then repeating that again with Runefang Steel. So the shades kind of make things darker, and then you kind of just go over just the edges again with the same color paint to really make it pop. Next up, we have Illuminor Szeras's base. I think this base is probably just as hard as the model, but that's probably just because I've done a lot of Necrons, so that part is kind of easy. So what I'm doing is I'm just applying a thick coat of PVA glue or wood glue, and sticking some of the big rocks and this desert sand mixture. It's just the bits of sand and little stones. And once that has been applied, I'm just going to dilute some more of the same glue with a bit of water, just to thin it down because you don't want it too thick. And then once that's been done, you apply that over the top to stick all the rocks and sand on top. If you don't do that, they kind of will just drop off, and so this way it kind of creates like a protective seal, but without being too thick. So once that's all done, it's time to prime. So I'm using a flat grey colour here because there's not really a lot of metallic on this one. Priming in black is not necessary, and so the grey is kind of just a little bit easier because we're going to actually come along here with Stormvermin Fur, which is like a sort of a blacky grey, not like a bluey grey, and just do it over brushing with my wife's makeup brush and just kind of go over all of the sand with that. And the reason we do this is if we do make a mistake and we need to touch up, we can just use the Stormvermin Fur and touch up with the exact same colour, whereas trying to use the same colour as a spray can be quite difficult. So now I've got Administratum Grey, which is a very light grey colour, and I'm just doing some dry brushing here. I've got most of the paint off the brush, and I'm just kind of just getting the highlights. So what this does is the peaks and the tips of all the stones and sand particles and debris, it just kind of creates a lighter colour, which kind of captures like the sun reflecting off it. And then again with the Dechala Lilac, this is a very subtle kind of purple colour. So it's almost white but with a purple hint, and that just kind of creates a little bit more alien contrast, and it also contrasts really well with the green colour in the Necron model. So it kind of complements each other, I guess, in a colour wheel kind of way. Now we're moving on to just normal white. So I'm using Corax White here, but you can use any white colour, it's totally fine. And I'm just painting the actual building debris with this colour so that you can actually see in the Games Workshop thing that certain parts of this kind of building has collapsed and like the ruins of that building is around. And then I'm using red. So I used to use Mephiston red, but I ran out, so I'm just using Evil Sun Scarlet red, which is a little bit brighter than I want. And I'm painting this, metal beam, this red color. And the reason why is my terrain that I've used this color, as you can see here. And then for the pants, I'm using Rakarth Flesh, which is sort of like a bony color. I wasn't quite sure what color to kind of paint this person's outfit, so I just thought I'd try this color as kind of a subtle tone because I didn't want to bring too much attention to the model. And there's also a few skulls on the beam and on the ground. For the flesh, I'm using Cadian Flesh. I've been trying to use contrast paint to do flesh tones, but I've really struggled with it. I've not been able to get good coverage, so I'm trying just to use now a base paint just to get like the skin tone across. If you've got any tips on how to use contrast paint for realistic flesh tones, let me know. Dark Reaper here, which is a sort of a bluey green bluey black paint. Gosh, that I'm using it to paint the boots, just to give his feet like a little bit of a different color from the rest of the terrain. So I guess it's sort of like a dark leather. And now Rhinox Hide is this brown color, and this is I use for leather, so sort of his satchel pouch thing that he has on his belt and that sort of stuff. Just trying to pick out all the details. But that's what I mean, that there's quite a lot of details in this base model compared to other Necrons that come with almost no base. So I've got the gold Retributor Armour that we used a lot on the Necron, and I'm using this to colour his sort of armoured chest plate. you know, maybe this man was like a psyker or some sort of high-ranking, you know, imperial officer, so I thought it would be fitting to have the gold, and then that also connects it back to the Necron model. Here I'm using a different a layer paint for white, which is White Scar, and it just means the layer paints are just a little bit easy to apply. There's a lot more paint particles in it, and so I'm just painting his eyes, his hands, that all the skin and bone have been sucked off, his beard, and the Aquila sort of parchments that they've got. And now with Leadbelcher, which is the silver colour, I've noticed that there's a few bits of metal sticking out of the debris. So I'm just pulling out those parts and painting them, as well as sort of his backpack component. And I'm just doing this to give the White Scar paint time to dry. And yeah, the leather pouches have sections where they would be metallic. And so I'm using this pink horror layer paint, which I don't use very often because I don't get many opportunities, to kind of paint his brains and blood that's being sucked out by the Necron weapon. I've used a thick brush here and I've kind of watered it down a bit so that the recesses get a bit more paint and the edges get less, so it kind of creates a little bit of a texture. And now it's shading time, so his hand that is just being plucked to bone and his beard, I'm putting some Nuln Oil on. I'm putting Agrax Earthshade on his pants and some Seraphim Sepia, which is a sepia, hence the name, colour on the debris, just to kind of age it up a bit and make it look like it's old, as well as like the parchment. And here I'm using Beserker Bloodshade, which is a ready shade from Citadel, and I'm just applying that onto the pink because it was all a bit too pink and I wanted it to be a bit more blood and guts and brain. And then Doomfire Magenta is the first contrast paint I'm using, and I'm just kind of doing it on 50% of it. I've probably put a too thick a coating. In hindsight, I would have liked to have watered this down and sort of built up more gradual layers. But yeah, at the moment it's sort of like the top half is very red and the bottom half is very pink, and it's not very well blended in between the two. And finally, Abaddon Black is where I paint the rims. Obviously you can paint the rim any color you like, but I find that black kind of makes the eye move away from it. And the soles of the shoes as well, I'm painting black as well, just to give them a little bit different color than the Dark Reaper. And then I'm pretending to do some writing on these parchments of paper. And now it's time to add some foliage. So I have Alien Turquoise, which is this greeny tufts of fur, as well as Alien Neon, which is very bright, but this time it's got the pink in the blood to kind of tie it together. And I'm just adding another one just to kind of flesh it out because it is quite a large base, and you're meant to kind of put more than one tuft in. I wasn't happy with the colour of the pants and the clothes. It just was blending too much into the base. So I have Druchii Violet, which is a purple shade, and I'm just going over the Rakarth Flesh paint just to kind of give it a little bit of a colour, just because it was just grey on grey and it was very boring, and I thought maybe these robes maybe had a little bit more of a tint. And now that it's all dried, it's time to super glue the model on place, and this leg that had fallen off, I'm sticking that back on, and it's all back together. I'm super happy with how this turned out. I think it's, almost like a diorama type piece of, model where you've got an actual story that's being told. And I'm very excited about trying my first named character on the battlefield when I get to play next with my Necron army. And for $20, this was so much fun to do and such a fun project, and I'm really happy with how it all turned out. Hopefully it was pretty easy to follow along. If you've got any comments, questions, or anything else, feel free to leave a comment. I try to reply to every single one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.